Hi, everybody. Well, I got kind of a good story here today because, you don't see this very often where people kind of go out of their way to help you. So as most of you know on the channel, I am down here in Nova Scotia this week, putting my stepfather, reuniting him with my mother, laying him in the final resting place, and then we're also down here to find my dad's stone. And I said, for my dad, I literally looked for 2.5 hours through almost the whole graveyard and couldn't find it. And so we finally got a hold of somebody at the funeral home, and they had said, he's in location F, in section F. At least that narrowed it down. So we get to but they couldn't tell us where section F was in the graveyard. But when we got there, there was some guys working on the lawn and everything there, and I walked over and I asked him where section F was, and he says, oh, it's that section right over there. It's that big section. I said, oh, good. Looked for another hour, and couldn't find him. And now I'm going, this is bad. We don't want to leave Nova Scotia without seeing my dad, paying our respects. And my sister was getting upset, and so I called the funeral home again and got a different young lady on the phone. And this is Brown's Funeral Home in Spring Hill, Nova Scotia. And she says, the lady who normally knows like the cemetery, and she actually works for the cemetery as well as us, she's off today, but she can get back to you tomorrow. I said, unfortunately, we have to be leaving tomorrow. We were looking all day yesterday and that, and she ended up saying, well, let me see if I can call her on the phone, and she can guide me to give you better directions. I said, okay. So she calls me back, and she kind of explains what the lady had said the night before, and that seems to be where I was. However, she says, here, let me give you some names that should be from the road you're on, and the names didn't match. So obviously I was in the wrong spot. She said, well, you know what? Just wait there. I'll be there in 5 minutes. She jumped out, went to her car, and drove down with a big map with all the names and the plot locations, and she guided me. We were in completely the wrong spot, and she guided us right to where my dad was buried. And so I was like, that's like, my dad was buried in 1984, 39 years ago, and they still, we're not putting somebody new in Spring Hill. The other funeral was in Tatamagouche, Nova Scotia, and they went out of their way like that to help us out. So I was very appreciative. I tried to tip her. She didn't want to tip. I said, please put it towards something. Donate it to the Legion. Donate it to the cemetery. Whatever you were raising money for, please put it towards that. So I gave a bit of a donation that way. And then we are in a very small town here it's Tatamagouche, Nova Scotia. There's no place. Only florist here had closed down. But we wanted to obviously bring flowers out for my grandmother and my mom and Gary. And we found a lady who works part-time out of her garage that somebody gave us a number for. And she was in the middle of doing a bunch of stuff and some other funeral homes and everything. And we told her what we wanted. We asked her. She said, sure. We stopped by, and she was in the middle of still doing other stuff. We chose some flowers and everything. And she kept working, and I said, you guys go to supper and I'll get this stuff ready, while she was still working on other stuff. And she went and got all this ready for us. Big, beautiful bouquets. You can see them here in front of my grandmother and Mom and Gary's headstones. And she worked on them for a couple hours, getting them ready. And if anyone's ever bought a bouquet of flowers from a florist, you know how expensive they are, right? And if you're the only place for miles and miles around, you completely, I was expecting this to be about $250. And so how much do you think she was going to charge me for both of those bouquets that she did spontaneously out of the goodness of her heart for us? She wanted $50 for both. Total, $50. So no, I gave more than that, and just to thank her, because I was very appreciative that she went out of her way to get nice flowers, and we didn't have to get, something from somewhere that just like a gas station or something. I would have felt terrible. So we met some amazing people here on our trip who went out of their way to help us and make our saying goodbyes down here so much easier. And then I also want to say we had a big coincidence. So my mother's mother, my grandmother, was married to a man down here named Wilbur Atchison. And they lived on a big farm, and he used to work at own a lumber mill. And they had this big farmhouse, and then up the driveway, the farmhouse was on the left, and then they had another bungalow on the right, and his kids used to stay in there. So my sister and I, when we were waiting for the flowers to be made, we went over to the hotel, and we were eating in the restaurant at the hotel. Again, Balmoral Hotel, Tatamagouche, Nova Scotia, if you're ever there. Great food in the restaurant, absolutely great food in the restaurant. And we were eating, and my sister looks over and sees somebody, and she goes, I think that's Dale. And so she goes over and says hi. It is the family that lived in that little bungalow, relatives of my grandfather, and by marriage, so not direct relatives. And they were having a big family reunion where all their family came down to visit, sisters and kids and grandkids and all this other stuff. And they were having a big get together, two big tables full. Must have been 20 of them there. And I asked him, I said, did any of those people that are with you, did they used to live in the bungalow as well as young girls? And he said, oh, my sisters did. So I went out and said hi, because those were the young girls when I was young that I played with. We used to have like water balloon fights and chased each other around, guys against the girls and stuff like that when my parents went down to visit. And they all remembered exactly. They said we had no idea. We would never have recognized each other, but we remember the memory. So talk about a big coincidence. We're in town for literally a day and a half, and we run into the people who I used to play with as a kid when I used to come down maybe a total of 6 times in my childhood. That's pretty coincidental. So all in all, it's been an emotional trip, and it's been a tiring trip, but totally worthwhile. And I cannot thank the people that we met here enough for helping us out when we needed help. Small town service, folks. You don't see it when you live in the big cities as often, and when you do, you remember it. And it just reminded me what it was like living in small town Canada again, where people go out of their way to make sure you're okay and make sure you're satisfied with their service, even if they're not getting paid for it. Imagine that.